All right, thanks so much for speaking with us again today. So let's hop into it. My first question, you were elected to the State House just a couple of years ago. So why are you running for Congress now?
So you know the numbers down at the state capitol, 19 to 46 Republicans to Democrats. State Senate, no different. You got 12 Republicans, 23 Democrats, and we have no statewide elected Republicans left anymore in Colorado. So I don't care whether you're making frozen pizza, trying to run a business, a state, or a country, that level of groupthink and echo chamber is bad. We have to have collaborative dialogue. We have to have the ability to exchange ideas. And so when I look around at my native state where I grew up and I say, how do we get some balance back to Colorado? This district, the 8th Congressional District, truly is that linchpin to being able to drive some balance back so that we can have conversations about how do we secure the border, how do we get the cost of living under control, how do we fix the crime problem that we have going on in Colorado right now, how do we make sure that fentanyl isn't the #1 killer of Americans ages 18 to 45. These are all policy issues that I was focused on down at the state capitol, obviously the state corollaries thereof, and these are things that I want to continue to work on in Congress.
When you look back at these last 2 years at the Capitol, what would you say is your biggest accomplishment?
Yeah, so one of the things I'm most proud of, again, I'm in a super minority, and I still got almost 60% of my bills passed. And that's because I'm able to reach out, build those coalitions, have that collaborative dialogue, and figure out how do we move the ball forward on things like school safety, things like roadway safety, things like making sure that one of the bills that I passed earlier this year was a water quality, water safety bill, ultimately designed to make sure that we're keeping the South Platte River watershed safe in the manner in which we handle our wastewater. So being able to focus on those crime issues, those cost of living issues, and then also keeping an eye on the environment.
So from your perspective, serving in Congress would give you more individual power than you have right now? What if the other party has control?
Yeah, well, the other party has control here in Colorado, and again, I still got 60% of my bills passed. This enables us to be able to focus, or enables me to be able to focus on some of those bigger picture issues that you can't quite get at from the state legislature. Things like securing the border, things like making sure that we don't have this massive influx of things like fentanyl into our communities that we know are originating in China. They're coming predominantly across the southern border and into our communities. And again, this also helps drive the pendulum back toward that place of balance and dialogue in Colorado. And that was something that we saw was sorely lacking down at the state capitol over these last couple of years.
You spoke at former President Trump's rally in Aurora on Friday. Why did you decide to speak?
Again, it's the same message that I've been carrying. How do we secure the border? How do we make sure that Colorado is not the third worst state in the nation for our crime rate? We are #3 after only 2 other states. We're worse than California, Oregon, Washington State, Illinois, New York State. This is a problem. This is a problem that I've been focusing on during my time in law enforcement, and this is tied directly to these issues that we've been talking about. How do we ensure that we're empowering law enforcement, holding criminals accountable, and making sure that our border is secured so that we're not inviting cartels and transnational criminal organizations into our community? This is something that my opponent, unfortunately, has been very weak on. You go look through her votes of lowering the penalties for drug dealers, lowering the penalties for people who commit violent crimes with firearms, defunding the police. These policies are what got us here. I saw it as a cop in the Denver metro area, and I know how to fix it.
From that same stage you spoke, the former president suggested using the military on the enemy within. His words were, all the scum who hate our country. Do you agree with that? Should the military ever be used on American citizens?
I've been very clear on this, and again, I've served in the Colorado Army National Guard for total service was 12 years, a little bit of that time in the Virginia Guard, so right around 10 years in the Colorado National Guard. I've been very clear that we got to do 3 things. Number 1, we've got to secure the border. That means we control what's going back and forth across the border, and we've seen that the National Guard has been deployed in capacities like that where they're protecting the territorial integrity of the United States. We also have to make sure that we are fixing the broken immigration system for those folks that want to legally come to the United States and be a contributing part of the American dream. You've heard my story. My grandfather is one of those folks. came to the United States from Mexico, earned his citizenship with Patton's Third Army fighting in World War II along with 2 Purple Hearts. We've got to make sure that these folks that are trying to do it the right way aren't trapped in, bureaucratic jail for decades. And then we have to empower our law enforcement to be able to aggressively prioritize those individuals that are in our communities that are committing violent crimes. We have the law enforcement resources to be able to do this. We just have to empower our law enforcement rather than defunding them or handcuffing them, as my opponent has called for and or voted.
Right, didn't hear an answer. Should the military ever be used on American citizens?
Now, the Posse Comitatus Act prevents that stuff.
All right, at that rally, Trump also, of course, announced Operation Aurora, saying that he wants to hunt down, arrest, and deport immigrants who've committed crimes here. What do you think about that?
Again, we need to prioritize those individuals who are in our communities committing crimes. My opponent voted for a law in 2021 that made it illegal for law enforcement to even pick up the phone and call Immigration and Customs and say, hey, we got an individual, a drug dealer, a gang member, you name it, that's in our community committing crimes. We suspect that they're illegally in the country. Come check this out, and if necessary, deport this violent criminal that's in our community. That became illegal in 2021 in Colorado as a result of a bill that my opponent voted for. So we need to empower our law enforcement officers to be able to enforce the law at the federal, state, and local level for those individuals who are illegally in our communities and committing crimes.
So what should happen to the individuals who are here unlawfully but are not criminals?
So the first thing we got to do again is secure the border, because until the border is secure, really all the rest of this is a moot point. And we can see that in the headlines that pop up from time to time where an individual is unlawfully present in our communities, they commit a crime, they get deported, and then they come right back. They get deported and they come right back. So as long as that border is wide open, the rest of these things, it's really not a fruitful conversation to have. After the border's secure, then we can start to have some of those conversations. For example, one of the things that comes up is childhood arrivals. And I think that we have to be humane. I've been on the record for this for a while. We have to be humane when we look at those individuals who know no other life than the one they know here in the United States, and we have to find some sort of path forward for permanency for them after we secure the border. Again, there's no fruitful conversation as long as the border is still porous and open.
Have you given it any thought about what should happen to those millions of people? We've seen estimates from 10 to 20 million plus.
Yeah, that's why I talk about making sure we fix that broken immigration system for folks who legally want to follow the process. We have a process for coming to the United States either on some sort of permanent residency status or becoming a full-blown citizen. And the issue is, I talked to a gentleman up in Berthoud, Colorado the other day, which is in the district, from Brazil. He's been working for 17 years to legally get his citizenship here in the United States. And he said it's going to be probably another 4 years before it actually goes through. 21 years trapped in the pipeline. We've got the system backwards right now. If you unlawfully cross our border, you immediately get all of these taxpayer-funded resources, but if you try to do it right, like this gentleman from Brazil, you spend 2 decades trapped in the system. We've got to reverse that so that those folks who are committed to doing it the right way or who want to begin to do it the right way have a workable process to be able to gain lawful status here in the United States. But you can't cut in line.
All right. Why do you not support the bipartisan border security package that some say would have went a long way in solving all these problems?
So that bipartisan package, you're talking the one at the federal level, that one had bipartisan opposition because really what that did was enshrine into law the fact that 5,000 asylees per day can be admitted into the United States. That's over 1.8 million per year. And so when you have that number of just asylees, again, there's numerous other processes by which folks can come to the United States, TPS status, a lot of other different visa programs. So we're talking 1.8 million asylees per year. you don't have the Border Patrol actually on the border in a situation like that. The Border Patrol then becomes more of an administrative role in which they're just processing all of these folks into the United States. So the name of that bill, is cast as the bipartisan border security bill. You read into the policy of it, it didn't really do a whole lot to secure the border. It was more geared toward enshrining in law the numbers that we've seen of folks just flowing into our country on asylee and a variety of other different statuses.
By the way, the sponsors of that bill, including a conservative senator from Oklahoma, Senator Langford, says it would not allow for 5,000 people to enter the U.S. each day. He says it's referring to 5,000 encounters, that if that were to happen, 5,000 encounters at the border, the Homeland Security Secretary could bar people from requesting asylum and then shut the border down. So he's pushing back on claims that it would allow 5,000 people into the U.S. every day.
So I read the bill. That was how I read the bill. That was my understanding of the bill. That's how a lot of other folks have understood the bill. And again, when you go look at the nuts and the bolts of how the bill is actually implemented, there were a lot of concerns that it wasn't quite ready for prime time yet, and that it needed to go back to the drawing board to find a better balance for how do we fix the broken system while also making sure that border security is at the forefront of our policy priorities.
I want to get some clarity about your position on abortion. You said you were as pro-life as they come, but you also said you would not support a national abortion ban. So is it fair to say that you believe abortion is an issue strictly for the states?
Yeah, I think the Supreme Court very clearly sent that back to the states in their recent decision. And so as a candidate for a congressional level office, no, I don't support a national abortion ban. Moreover, as a police officer for 10 years, I've worked with the victims of rape and incest. I know that we have to have the flexibility to take care of those folks in these tragic situations. And so I support exceptions for rape and incest. My wife and I have had 2 live kids. We've had 8 miscarriages. And so I've seen how absolutely complex these situations involving reproductive care can be, and so I know that you always have to have exceptions for life of the mother.
In your opinion, was the Supreme Court right in overturning Roe?
I think the Supreme Court very clearly sent this back to the states for the states to be able to handle, and we see that in the Constitution, in the 10th Amendment, where it talks about stuff that's not at the federal level is explicitly delegated to the states.
Right. Should abortion at any point ever be criminalized, in your opinion?
I don't think, no. Like you're talking like putting pregnant women or doctors in jail? Absolutely not. Never. I think that, there's, again, I'm the cop. I'm always going to go to the worst case, scenario in my mind. So I think that we have to make sure that pregnant women are receiving appropriate care. And if you have some, unlicensed clinic that's just egregiously violating medical norms, then obviously that's not acceptable either. But no, under no circumstances should we ever be criminalizing doctors or pregnant women.
So last year we saw that you voted against a SHIELD law, 23-188, designed to protect women who travel from other states to Colorado to have an abortion from criminal persecution. Why'd you vote against that?
So I've done a lot of investigations involving domestic violence, sex assault, child abuse, human trafficking, things of that nature as a police officer. And so as I read that bill, I understood what it was trying to do, which, as you said, was to provide that protection for women from out of state who travel to Colorado for an abortion. But that was a 29-page long bill that really muddied the waters about how some of those other investigations could take place. Again, domestic violence, where a pregnant woman is the victim, child abuse, sex assault, human trafficking, all of these situations are places where a pregnant woman could be the victim here, and an abuser, human trafficker, or somebody else could be inappropriately leveraging their influence to try to cause them to get an abortion. The Guttmacher Institute acknowledges that this is a form of reproductive control. And so as I read that bill, I had a lot of concerns that we would actually be creating a kind of chaotic situation in which legitimate situations where women and girls are victims might not be able to get the justice that they deserve if an abortion is in any way, shape, or form linked to a criminal episode of domestic violence, child abuse, sex assault, human trafficking with a pregnant woman as the victim.
Now, on the economy, do you support former President Trump's plan to impose more tariffs on China and other countries?
So I'm generally a free market sort of individual. I think that we have a better economy when goods can freely move back and forth. I think China is a very unique situation because we know that in China, you don't actually have a level playing field. The Chinese government heavily subsidizes some of their favorite industries, and then they're able to enforce the production of the goods that those industries are manufacturing through, at times, straight up human rights abuses and slave labor. And so we know that a business that operates on a free market principle with free people who choose to work at that business is not going to be able to compete with the Chinese government that's subsidizing and protecting their industries. So for China, we absolutely need to make sure that there is a level playing field that's enforced. And one of the ways that we can do that with the United States and how we trade is through the imposition of tariffs on Chinese goods, particularly Chinese goods that are either subsidized by the Chinese government, produced with slave labor, things like that.
But tariffs are a tax that eventually the consumer will have to pay through higher taxes.
Yeah, so that's why I said we have to focus on China as a separate case from the rest of our free market. I began that statement by saying I generally support free trade and the lowering of tariffs. And so what we need to do in the United States is make sure that we have a viable business environment so that businesses, corporations, entities that are producing jobs, that are giving us economic growth, want to actually come and be here in the United States and produce goods, create jobs, manufacture things here in the United States. When we create that positive environment by cutting punitive regulations, then you're not going to have that need for tariffs in many cases because folks already want to come to the United States and build, manufacture, produce, and create jobs here rather than sending them overseas or outside our borders.
So to be clear, you would support tariffs on China?
Yes.
And other countries, it depends, or?
Yeah, I generally am a free trade person. That's my philosophy. I think the economy does better and prices are lower when we can have either lower tariffs or reduced tariffs. We do that by creating a positive business environment here in the United States so that folks are actually producing here rather than producing somewhere else and then potentially subject to a tariff when they try to import into the United States.
As you know, Colorado has been facing a housing crisis. What role do you think the federal government has in helping states like Colorado address that?
One of the biggest challenges toward housing affordability is just the cost of energy. You look at all of the energy that goes into the manufacture of a house, whether it's getting the 2x4s, hauling the 2x4s to market, being able to actually assemble the house. All of these things take energy. They take truck drivers, they take diesel fuel. And when we don't produce American energy, when, going back to that previous conversation, when there are punitive regulations that make it exponentially more difficult to produce things here in the United States, well, guess what? That cost of living gets passed on all the way up and down the supply chain. So one of the best things we can do for housing affordability at the federal level is making sure that American energy is available and affordable. We produce some of the cleanest energy anywhere on the planet. If you replaced Russian natural gas going into Western Europe with American natural gas going into Western Europe, we would save the world about 200 million tons per year in carbon emissions. We produce some of the cleanest energy in the world. We need to produce more of it here in the United States. That's going to drive down the cost of all of the basic goods that we need for our modern way of life, to include a lot of the goods that go into being able to build more inventory of available and affordable housing.
All right, do you support the Affordable Care Act?
When I talk to folks, and again, this is with my wife and I having some, obviously she's the one that gets pregnant, but having high-risk pregnancies and then having 8 miscarriages after that, we spend a lot of time in doctor's offices. My second son, he has some medical disabilities, so he's got to get an inhaled steroid every morning, he's got to get a growth hormone injection every night. That stuff, ounce for ounce, is more valuable than gold. And so when I talk to folks in these doctor's offices, in the waiting rooms, and I say, hey, is care available and affordable to you? They say, well, it's harder and harder to get seen by a provider, and no, the cost of our care is going up, not down. Here in Colorado, we've seen double-digit premium increases for folks just trying to get health insurance, and we've seen multiple health insurers leave the marketplace in Colorado as a result of overregulation and a lot of government overreach into this space. So I support making care actually available and affordable again, and so I think there's things that definitely need to be addressed and tweaked in the Affordable Care Act so that we can get back to available and affordable care for families like mine that have medical situations.
So it sounds like you would not be in favor of repealing it, but just making some changes?
I want health care to be available and affordable to everyone. When I was overseas in the Middle East flying helicopters, we had a simple saying: does it work? Let's do it. If it doesn't work, it doesn't matter how good it looks on paper, we need to go back to the drawing board and figure out something that actually works. And so that's where I think we are with the Affordable Care Act. We need to take a long, hard look at it and figure out how can we adjust, modify, tweak, and improve a lot of the policy processes in there to actually make healthcare available, accessible, and affordable to everyone that needs it.
Right, on your website you say the Biden administration uses the military for social experimentation, woke virtue signaling. What specifically do you mean by that? Are there specific policies that you are referring to?
Yeah, so again, I spent 12 years in the Army, and I know that the military is supposed to be focused on defending the country by being prepared to fight aggressive kinetic wars. You want to deter war, you deter war through strength. You deter war through having a strong military that is 100% focused on doing their job, which is to actually go out and in close combat engage, destroy, and defeat enemies of the United States. And unfortunately, that's not what I see a lot of times that's happening with our modern military. We're starting to see political correctness creep into the military. That not only detracts from operational readiness, that deters us from being able to recruit the next generation of warfighters. The military quite often ends up being a family business. If your dad, your uncle, your brother, your grandparents were in the military, there's a much greater likelihood that you go into the military as well. But when these again, our next generation of warfighters is exploring career options, and they're saying, if I go into the military, am I going to get the training, and is there going to be the emphasis on kinetically engaging and winning wars that I need? And they see a lot of politically correct agendas and policing.
Like what specifically, when you say political correct agendas, what are you specifically referring to?
Yeah, so I'll give you an example. There was a grand reopening of an armory here in both my State House district and the 8th Congressional District. And one of the bullet points that was specifically briefed on this on the grand reopening of this armory was we now have gender-neutral bathrooms. Why? I mean, if you want to upgrade the bathrooms, that's great. But why are we specifically presenting and briefing these as we're losing the focus here? This is mission creep. We're not focused on bathrooms. We should be focusing on the operational readiness of this facility and how it makes sure that our servicemen and women have the best chance to get the training that they need so that if they have to go overseas to a combat zone, they can survive those encounters and come home.
What's so bad about gender-neutral bathrooms? I mean, every house has one.
Yeah, just the emphasis on it. If that was just how the building was designed, but that wasn't presented as one of the key points for this, I would have had no problems with it. I would have appreciated having a much nicer bathroom. I've been to some really bad military bathrooms, but it was the emphasis on it. It was, out of all of the different things that could have been selected at that armory, it was the emphasis on how they described these bathrooms and making sure that that was a major talking point, rather than, again, focusing on the warfighting and training capabilities of that facility. I have no problem with the bathroom itself. They were very nice bathrooms. But why, out of a 30-minute briefing, are we taking 5 minutes to talk about those instead of any of the other critical operational and combat necessary features of that facility?
All right. You wrote an op-ed long ago explaining why you were opposed to same-sex marriage. You said you now feel differently about that, right?
Absolutely.
You've evolved, as many Americans have. Explain to me how you evolved and why you evolved on that.
You just heard a big piece of the story right there. I wrote that op-ed when I was 17 years old. Had held a driver's license for about a year at the point, had never had a girlfriend, And since then, I did 12 years in the U.S. Army, Colorado Army National Guard, to include a combat deployment overseas, another 10 years in law enforcement, and I worked with Americans from every color, race, religion, and creed. I worked with gay and lesbian soldiers. I worked with gay and lesbian cops. I would have taken a bullet for them. They would have taken a bullet for me, because we weren't focused on that. We were focused on how do we work together to accomplish the mission. How do we take care of our country, our state, our community? How do we make sure that we all go home at the end of the shift, or we all go home at the end of the deployment? And so as a result of that, again, and kind of going back to the previous conversation, I think that what we choose to emphasize and talk about matters. And so what I've learned is that, look, I've worked with these folks. They would have taken a bullet for me, I would have taken a bullet for them, and it was because we were focused on what united us. We were focused on keeping the territorial integrity of the United States safe. We were focused on ensuring that, again, I'm a veteran of the global war on terror, making sure that terrorists didn't come back into our country and wreak the carnage that we saw on September 11th in 2001, making sure that our communities stayed safe, making sure that we weren't the number 3 state in the nation for our crime rate. And so those are the things that I'm focused on now, again, and I'm focused on the things that unite us.
Curious, since you're former law enforcement, we hear that there's been a shortage of law enforcement here, especially in recent years. Why do you think that is, and what do you think Congress can do to help?
So I think it's actually the most recent survey from the Fraternal Order of Police. So that's the union that represents about 9,000 rank and file law enforcement members in Colorado. They did a survey about 2 years ago that asked rank and file law enforcement officers, why are you in the profession? What would keep you in the profession, and what are those things that might cause you to leave the profession? And one of the biggest concerns that came out as a result of that survey was just the rhetoric around law enforcement. And unfortunately, my opponent has engaged in a lot of that anti-law enforcement rhetoric, calling for immigration and customs to be defunded, calling for law enforcement to either be defunded or have policies passed that defund them, empowering criminals, putting more liability on law enforcement officers. These are all things that just make the already difficult job of being a police officer, a state trooper, a sheriff's deputy, etc. These things just make it much harder to be in the law enforcement profession. And so one of the first things we have to do is just use the platform to be able to talk about the good things that law enforcement does, and make sure that we're giving them the tools and the equipment, and of course always the accountability that they need to be able to go out and do a very, very difficult job with individuals who at times are going to be outright uncooperative, belligerent, and up to and including being willing to use deadly force against police officers. And so when we look in Colorado specifically, what can you do at the congressional level? It's being able to carry that message that our police officers, our law enforcement, do a good job. They've sworn that oath up to and including their lives to take care of the community, and we need to resource them and provide them with what they need to go out and do that job, not handcuff them through additional liability, overregulation, more paperwork, and empowering criminals, because that truly is demoralizing to law enforcement.
A couple of foreign affairs questions here. Should the U.S. continue to provide funding for Ukraine?
So for Ukraine, there's a couple of things that we have to, a couple of needles that we have to thread. Under no circumstances can Putin, a rogue dictator, get the idea that if he's just obnoxious enough and stubborn enough, he's allowed to go take over other countries willy-nilly. We have to send an absolutely definitively strong message that that is not allowed in our modern world in 2024. We also have to acknowledge that there's a lot of folks that are concerned about what's happening here in the United States. We just saw a couple of hurricanes and some concerning statements from FEMA saying, they don't know if they'll have the funds to get through the hurricane season. And so we have to make sure that if we decide to continue to fund Ukraine, that we do it in the most efficient and effective manner. So that means making sure that any of that funding is subject to audits to make sure it goes where it belongs and isn't siphoned off through any sort of corruption or illegitimate either business deals or government deals or anything like that. We also have to make sure that if we decide to move forward with continuing to provide aid to Ukraine, that we do it We do it all at once. In the military, there's this thing called mass. Basically means if you mass your forces, you're going to be a lot more effective than if you spread them all out. We have to do the same thing with any additional aid that we give them. We have to allow the Ukrainians the ability to mass their forces and be able to gain a decisive military edge, gain decisive military objectives, rather than just continue this forever war that's going on in the eastern part of Ukraine right now.
All right, and what about Israel?
Absolutely. Israel is our most critical ally in the Middle East. You have a little bit different scenario there, where Israel has an opponent who has literally, the opponent of course being the Iranian regime, who has literally refused to acknowledge Israel's right to exist. That's what it means when they chant from the river to the sea. It means Israel does not have a territorial right to exist anymore. And I take a strong, strong position of opposition to that. Israel has a right to exist. They are our most critical ally in the Middle East. They're the only fully functioning democracy in the Middle East. And so we need to make sure that the Israeli government and the Jewish people have the support that they need to be able to protect the territorial integrity of Israel and the fact that Israel has a right to exist.
Should there be conditions on aid to Israel, like you were suggesting with Ukraine?
I think you have a little bit of a different scenario there. Burisma is a Ukrainian company that Hunter Biden had dealings with. You don't really have a similar situation in Israel. And again, we're talking about the right to exist for a people who have been the subject of a lot of persecution and outright violence over the years. So for Israel, I think that it's pretty unconditional. We must support Israel.
All right, but Ukrainians have a right to exist too.
Absolutely.
So what is the difference? Because it kind of seems like nothing for Ukraine unless you meet all these different conditions, but Israel, no problem.
Yeah, so again, I think the difference between there is, number one, look at the geopolitical situation. It's a very different geopolitical situation for Israel versus Ukraine. And then number two, when you look at the difference in that geopolitical situation, you have a very clear stalemate that's going on right now in Russia, where a lot of the territory of Ukraine it's not really subject to any sort of major sustained attack. Pretty much every inch of Israel is potentially subject to rocket attacks, missile attacks, mortar attacks, infiltration attacks, because the country is just so much smaller. And so because of that, because of the fact that Israel is surrounded by entities that are ultimately funded by the Iranians, Hamas in the south, Hezbollah in the north, the stakes in Israel are a lot higher because of the size of the country, because of the geopolitical situation of the country, and because of the outright commitment by the Iranian regime to not acknowledging that Israel has a right to even exist.
Right. All right, 1 minute or so. Why should people vote for you in November?
I was born and raised in Colorado, 12 years in the U.S. Army and Colorado Army National Guard, another 10 years in law enforcement, married with 2 boys. My grandfather is an immigrant to this country from Mexico. And so I understand where we're at right now, the crossroads that we're at. We have a clear choice. Do we reward work or do we punish work through punitive overregulation like my opponent has done? Do we secure the border or do we continue to empower drug dealers and vote for sanctuary city and state policies as my opponent has done? Do we back our law enforcement and get back to having safe communities, or do we continue down the path that my opponent has voted for numerous times by defunding law enforcement and empowering criminals, which has resulted in Colorado being the 3rd worst state in the nation for our crime rate? This is the choice that folks have. I know how to solve these things. I know how to make Colorado and the United States a safe, affordable place to live, work, and raise families again. Down at the state capitol in that super minority, I still got almost 60% of my bills passed because I can build those bipartisan coalitions. It's why 2/3 of the mayors in the district are supporting me over the incumbent congresswoman. These are the things I'm focused on: border security, cost of living, getting our communities safe again, holding drug dealers accountable. That's what I'm going to continue to do in Congress.
All right, was there anything that you wanted me to ask that we didn't ask, that you wanted to point out?
Yeah, 3 years ago I was a police officer. And I stopped being a police officer because I saw the direct impact of the policies that my opponent voted for. Again, I saw the additional liability that was imposed on police officers. I saw the additional paperwork that was imposed on police officers that took us off the streets and kept us sitting at the desk, unable to actually go out and take care of our communities. I saw the defund the police policies that she supported that caused us to struggle to have enough school resource officers in schools, that required us to take folks out of our drug interdiction teams. That's the motivation that led me to step away from my job in law enforcement and get engaged in politics, because I know that where we're at right now in Colorado with our crime problem, our fentanyl problem, our cost of living problem, our open borders problem, our sanctuary state problem, those things all ultimately have bad policy as their root cause. And so I'm focused on trying to address those policies by putting into practice the 22 years of experience I gained in the military and in law enforcement, and of course rounding that out with some of the the softer skill sets that I have as a husband, as a father, having a couple of cattle, working in the agricultural community, things like that. So those are the things I'm focused on through my experience, making sure that we can make Colorado and the United States an affordable, safe place to live, work, and raise families again.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.